Question 22. We have a circle. We have chords all over the shop. We have numbers, lengths all over the shop, and we're trying to figure out, the end game is figuring out what this length is here. When you've got a situation like this where you've got chords and secants, so like this part here in pink is a chord, but then when it extends outside of the circle like this, it becomes a secant. You're going to be dealing with intersecting chords and intersecting secants. That's the topic that we're going to be having here. So intersecting chords and secants. Now, the first thing to note is whether or not you're dealing with chords or whether or not you're dealing with secants, the formula is still the same. You have an AX times BX, which equals a CX times DX, where AX is the length between A and the point of intersection X, BX is the length between B and the point of intersection X, so on and so forth. Now, one thing we have to be careful of here is that the letters involved in this question are all jumbled up. All right, we've got this A and D, and well, O is okay, but C, like everything else here, it doesn't quite align to this. Also, we've got two scenarios here. We actually have a situation where you have chords intersecting here, and we have secants intersecting here. So we've actually got a lot to try and digest in this problem. I'm going to try and do this the best I can in a couple of separate diagrams. So the first one I'm going to focus on is just the chords. Now, we've got this 7 here, and this 4 here, and then we have that, right, where we have this point D here. A and B I'm happy with because they're either side of a chord, so I'm going to leave A and B alone. D is this point here. O is the center of our circle, but that's not enough. We actually need the whole length inside this circle. So as much as we have this piece here to get that center, we actually need the whole length in order to have chords. So we have this chord here in red, and we're going to have this chord here in pink. Now, because of the fact of the way this formula works, CD is going to be a chord. I'm going to call this C, which means for now, I'm going to ignore this point here. I'm just going to ignore that point completely. I'm also going to label the point of intersection in the middle. I'll pick a different color as being X, because X is the point of intersection whenever you're dealing with chords and secants. Okay? So from this, what we have is the following. We have AX, which in this case is 7, multiplied by BX, which in this case is 4. 7 times 4 is going to equal, we have a length of 2 snuck in here, that's this 2 there, but then we don't have that length there. We have no mention of that length here. Also, well, we only have this given in the question, right? So I've had to add this extra length here just to kind of make the chord, because right now it's just a radius, we need to extend it to make it a diameter, which in this case is also a chord. And this length here I could refer to, or I can label in terms of R. We don't know what it is, so let's give it a variable. By doing that, that also implies that all of this is R, and therefore if this part is 2, I can label this here as being R minus 2. So what that does is that actually gives us, at least in terms of R, everything that we need to find the entire length of that blue line as 1. It's going to be an R minus 2, and it's going to be an R added together. So from that, I can put this in a bracket. We're going to take that R, we're going to add an R minus 2 to it, and that's going to give us this length here in blue. We're then going to multiply that by 2, which represents dx. I should have said that cx is the one here that's this R plus R minus 2. Very convoluted, very, messy, a lot of algebra here, even just to define the two chords and each part of the chord, either side of this intersection in terms of X. But we've got it. That's the equation set up using this formula here, where we're looking for the length, basically, of the 4 parts that make up the cross, where we're dealing with 2 chords intersecting one another. From that, we can actually figure out what R is if we just simplify and solve. So we have 28 here. If we tidy up what's inside the brackets, we end up with 2R minus 2, which when we multiply everything by 2 to expand that bracket, we end up with 4R minus 4. I add 4 to both sides, and then divide both sides by 4, which gives me the radius of this circle as being 8. So we're going to update this picture here with that newfound knowledge. That radius is 8, which means that the two lengths here, if I were to redraw this here, that length there in blue is 8. The length here is 6, and it also lets me add the fact that this is 8, which ties in nicely to the other diagram, which is what's going to be needed in order to figure out this length of x. So I'm going to undo this part C here, because we need to sort of, this point here is going to be useful, so I just want to make sure that it's clear to begin with. I'm going to redraw a new diagram over here on the left-hand side. So the intersecting secants occur when we have this here, which intersects with this, but that on itself is not enough. We'd have to extend that all the way there. So what I've highlighted there in red, that's what we're going to need for the other diagram here. If I label all of the, it doesn't really look very good actually, let me just do this. If we label all the pieces of information that we have here, let me just get rid of the red there for a bit of clarity. We have x, which is this part, that's the unknown. We know that this part here is 5. We know that this is 7 and this is 4, which combined is going to make 11. You'll see why we'll want that in a moment. And then on the inside of the circle, we have this 8 here, but then we also need to extend that in order to get this whole length here. Of course, this is the center of the circle as well, so hopefully it's okay to note that that's going to be 8 plus 8 for 16 is what we're going to end up with for this here. And we have that diagram. If I label the points that have been given, we have our A, B is either side of that chord. We have this point E here. We don't have a point labeled there, and we have this point C here at the end. Okay. Now, as far as this formula goes, straight away that doesn't match, because first of all, there's no E involved, and second of all, the point where they intersect must be X. So again, I'm going to ignore that C as an X, and I'm deliberately drawing that so it looks like 1. This here we're going to be calling X. So bye-bye C. The value of E is no use to us. We need a C and we need a D that are either side of a chord. So I'm going to change this to a C, and I'm going to call this D here, making that there our CD. So DC is our chord here, and AB is our chord there. Same formula, but we've got to be a little careful about how we substitute this in, because instead of it just being like the 4 parts of the cross like we had in the last one, with this point of intersection extending out the way, what you actually have is this purple length of 5 multiplied by the whole thing, because the whole thing is AX, and the purple bit is 5x. So you end up with this, I'll try and keep it color-coded, 5 times what's going to be 7 plus 4 plus 5 for 16. And on the other side, you're going to have this value of x here for the small length, for what ends up being cx here. That's going to get multiplied by the 16 plus x. So you can end up with an equation that looks like this, or x plus 16, either way. If we simplify that a little bit, break out the brackets on the right-hand side, I end up with the following, which is a quadratic equation which we can solve. Take away 80 from both sides, so we end up with a 0. I'm going to write the x squared first, like so. You've got 2 choices. You could use a quadratic formula to solve this. However, no mention of decimal places or significant figures, which means by design this question is going to factorize nicely. Factors of 80, 20 and minus 4, factors of negative 80, 20 and minus 4 are going to be the 2 that you want to mix together to get a 16x. And then after that, we said each factor equal to 0 and solve. Minus 20 makes no sense at all because we can't have negative lengths. But a positive 4, that definitely makes sense. And it even looks right in terms of the lengths that we have here. This length here being 4 looks close enough to that we're not in any suspicion about it. X is 4 is our value of x. And after a long 6 marks worth, using both this formula for chords and secants and a bit of algebra and construction, we are done.